regarde, c'est beau, hein? Oh oui! Ah, c'est fun! Quelle J'ai toujours rêvé d'être dans un film, mais comme une actrice fine, délicate de corps, avec de l'esprit, un beau
Hey,
look.
c'est ta
C'est...
grande chance. Puis t'as des belles lulus, ça fait rire ça.
T'aurais dû prendre une caméra quand t'avais 4 ans, puis que j'étais encore charmante.
Oh, c'est encore charmant. Est-ce que tu peux me raconter comme un petit peu des choses de quand j'étais petite?
T'avais à peu près 3 ans, puis on avait un petit jardin en arrière de la maison au village,
Ouais.
puis j'avais mis des pois, puis t'étais folle là-dedans, là, comme tu les cueillais à mesure, là, puis tu les mangeais, puis t'avais le soleil qui tombait sur toi, puis tu riais, puis tu souriais, puis tu mangeais tes pois. C'était tellement joli. T'étais très gourmande. T'as toujours eu un très bon rapport avec la nourriture.
My mom was born in ultra-Catholic Montreal in the 1950s, but she was always a bit of a rebel. By the time I came along when she was 24 years old, she was already very active with social justice and environmental groups. But she always said that her most important form of activism was growing our next tasty meal in her garden. For the first 6 years of my life, it was just me and my mom. Then my stepdad joined our clan, and soon after, my little sister was born. We moved to Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada, where I discovered that the kitchen was the best place to hang out. There were always treats to taste and good stories being shared.
Bonjour au Québec! Bonjour papa! Bonjour maman!
I was the nerdy kid who brought oddball lunches to school, and I was pretty sure we were the weirdest family on the block. When my parents bought their first house, my mom immediately ripped up the lawn and planted a huge garden where she grew all kinds of vegetables, berries, flowers, legumes, and garlic. She wanted me and my sister to grow up knowing the story behind the food that we ate, so our backyard was basically our grocery store. In 1996, I moved to the city. I had just turned 19 and was learning to make my own food choices. But that same year, the first genetically modified foods, also known as GMOs, had come on the market. And while many countries around the world were choosing to label them, Canada and the United States had decided against it, so if you wanted to avoid GMOs, you had to become a bit of a detective. I went from knowing everything about where my food came from to knowing very little.
To listen to the message, press 0.
C'est ta maman qui veut te dire que je t'adore tellement. Puis je vais essayer d'appeler dans une dizaine de minutes. Bye.
In her garden, my mom practiced the age-old tradition of seed saving. Like farmers have done for thousands of years, she replanted her own seeds year after year. And what bothered her about GMOs was that some of the world's largest chemical companies were patenting these new genetically engineered seeds and controlling the seed market. Farmers who grow GMOs have to sign technology license agreements promising never to save or replant the patented seeds. My mom didn't think it was a good idea to allow corporations to engineer and then patent the living organisms that we rely on for food. She believed that seeds belong in the hands of people. Over the years, she became a little bit obsessed with GMOs and started sending me every book she could find about genetic engineering. At first, I just rolled my eyes as my collection of unread books got bigger and bigger. But one day, I cracked open one of her books, and much to my surprise, I found that I couldn't put it down. I learned that GMOs are organisms whose genomes have been manipulated in a laboratory, often by moving genes from one species to another, something that doesn't happen in nature or through conventional breeding. The producers of GMOs claimed that these new organisms would benefit farmers, and that they were necessary to feed a growing population. The promise was that they would increase yields and reduce the use of pesticides. Whenever I came home to visit my parents, I noticed that more and more of the fields around our home were being planted with genetically engineered corn and soybeans. And I was curious why our neighbors were growing them.
Okay, are you rolling now, are you? Okay. Here we grow about 500 acres of corn, 300 acres of soybeans, and another 300 acres of winter wheat. We've been milking cows here for probably 3 generations. Well, we started using BT corn from the first year that was available, mainly because of the yield potential that's there. BT corn is a genetically modified corn, modified to resist certain weed sprays. It has stuff in there to help control insects. When an insect would start to eat the leaves on the corn, it would upset the digestive system and it would die. You know, they spend a pile of money on developing this new technology, so you can't really blame them, but it's another quite a little cost to us, to the farmer who has to buy all the seed instead of tanking it and reusing our own seed next year. It's an added expense.
Can I pull up this chair
Sure.
a little bit?
There are 2 techniques used for making transgenic plants. One is the gene gun. This is our gene gun. It started out as a sawed-off 22 in a guy's lab at Cornell. And it's still basically a kind of a shotgun approach. The gold particles, coat them with DNA, shoot them into a plant cell. And the more common technique, besides particle bombardment, is to put the gene that you want to put in the plants, put it into agribacterium, and agribacterium will then do the job. Here's one. Here's a tobacco plant with a pig gene. What do you think? Disappointed, aren't you?
A little bit, yes. I was expecting a snout.
It looks like any other tobacco plant. I'm personally not afraid of it, and I feed my kids. I'm not afraid of them eating GMOs.
With the actual process of genetic engineering, are there risks?
In genetics, we have the phrase called pleiotropic effects. It means that there are other effects in the plant that are unintended, but are a consequence of what you've done. I wouldn't be surprised if something came up somewhere along the line that we hadn't anticipated that's going to be a problem. I wouldn't be surprised.
This is the other crop in Canada that is mostly GMO.
Canola.
as a scientist, you're never going to get somebody to say, I'm absolutely sure, 100% guaranteed, there's not going to be a problem. And there are going to be mistakes, but we accept a risk when we climb into a car. For some reason, technological developments around communications, computers, all those kinds of things, well, we accept. Food, I would grant you, is special, but
There are 4 main GMOs in our food: corn, soybeans, sugar beet, and canola. The majority are used in animal feed to produce eggs, meat, and dairy. But GMOs are also found in more than 70% of processed foods. Most GMOs are engineered for just 2 main reasons: to fight insects and weeds. To fight weeds, plants are engineered to be herbicide resistant. This means they can be doused with an herbicide that will kill every plant in the field except the GMO. To combat pests, plants are engineered to be insecticide producers. For instance, BT corn is engineered so that every cell in the plant produces a toxin that kills insects when they eat it.
For anyone who heard our public forum last season on the safety of genetically modified organisms, you'll know it's one topic that arouses a lot of emotions and concerns. People want to know the food they're eating is safe and that the government is doing all it can to ensure that safety. Well, the government responded to that concern last year when it asked the Royal Society of Canada to put together a panel of experts to examine how genetically modified food is regulated in this country. Their report was released early last week, and it blasted the methods, the approach, and the entire philosophy of how we test, assess, and regulate GM foods and crops.
In 2001, while I was home for a visit, my mom and I heard on the radio that Canada's top scientific body had just released a scathing report that found major problems with the way GMOs are regulated. The report made 53 recommendations to the Canadian government for how to fix our regulatory system and bring it in line with peer-reviewed science and the precautionary principle, which says that new technologies should not be approved when there is still uncertainty about their long-term safety.
It's amazing that the government itself had commissioned this study by the Royal Society and then didn't work with it, didn't recognize the value in it. The regulatory agencies are still assessing corporate science without any transparency, without public involvement or peer review from the scientific community.
And the way it works is the company wants to have a product approved. They submit the scientific studies that they have done on their own product to the government. The government scientists then review that science. The problem with that approach is that all of that is done behind closed doors. So transparency and repeatability are gone, which is a fundamental aspect of scientific method. So it's just an obvious point that you can't really claim that it's science-based regulation if the science behind it is not peer reviewable.
Health Canada has always claimed to have a science-based regulatory system. But the Royal Society's report showed that GMO approvals are based on industry studies that have little scientific merit since they aren't peer-reviewed. After the report came out, my mom was determined to find out how many of its 53 recommendations were implemented. She wanted to ramp up her letter writing to politicians, and my sister and I decided it was high time she learn how to use a computer and set up her first email account.
Si tu bouges la flèche, tu vas aller sur dans un autre menu.
Ok, là, je peux peser. Ah.
Oui.
Puis là...
Qu'est-ce que tu penses qu'il faut faire?
Aller là? Non. Ça, ce serait se déconnecter.
Oui.
Gary, le téléphone est libre.
Hi, my name is Aube Giroux. I'm producing a documentary film about genetically engineered food, and I'd like to know if I could interview someone at Health Canada who could explain how GMOs are regulated in Canada.
Okay. Maybe if I put you in contact with the food directorate. Oh, okay. GMO foods, how they're regulated. The best thing to do is to throw in a couple of sample questions. I got back to me and said, no, we can only answer the last 2 questions, not the first 3. It might sound like we're giving you the runaround, but it's not really it. Any question about labeling should go to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
It's just that they told me to go to you guys, so do I go back to them now?
I'll look into this for you and get back to you as soon as I can.
Madame, Monsieur, en vue de notre proche atterrissage, veuillez attacher et ajuster votre ceinture de sécurité. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just landed in Paris at Roissy-Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Les Européens, je crois qu'une grande différence de l'Europe par rapport à l'Amérique, c'est que nous sommes une sorte de société qui voulons appliquer le principe de précaution. On ne veut pas prendre des risques simplement pour les traits du modernisme. L'Europe sortait tout juste de la fameuse crise de la vache folle, où beaucoup des citoyens européens se sont rendus compte finalement qu'on trafiquait l'alimentation, qu'il se passait beaucoup de choses dans la production alimentaire sans qu'ils le sachent. Et donc très vite, quand ils ont vu que l'Union européenne avait autorisé des importations d'OGM, ont commencé à protester et à demander à ce que ce soit étiqueté. Alors en Europe, la situation aujourd'hui, elle est que dans les produits alimentaires destinés aux êtres humains, il y a très peu de produits qui contiennent des OGM.
Ça va être une fortune et un pouvoir incroyable que de se mettre propriétaire des plantes qui ont nourri l'humanité pendant 11 000 ans parce qu'on a rajouté un gène artificiel. Donc déjà pour cette raison, on peut être contre manger des OGM. On peut être très en faveur des biotechnologies au laboratoire, mais c'est tout à fait différent d'en donner à manger à des gens sans savoir qui mange quoi. Et c'est la première fois dans l'histoire de l'humanité qu'une espèce, qui est la nôtre, est capable de modifier artificiellement le patrimoine héréditaire de tous les êtres vivants qui l'entourent à une vitesse industrielle, en transperçant la barrière sexuelle des espèces, c'est-à-dire en mettant un gène de chien dans du maïs. Le chien, il aurait pu essayer longtemps avant, il ne pouvait pas mettre ses gènes dans le maïs. Bien sûr qu'on découvrirait s'il y avait une toxicité à court terme, comme on découvre un nouveau virus de la grippe, parce que là, les gens sont malades dans les 15 jours. Mais si c'est une maladie qui se développe sur 20 ans ou 30 ans, comme les cancers, eh bien, on ne peut pas le voir.
Je vais allumer l'enfumoir pour calmer les abeilles.
Puisque l'abeille fait un rayon de jusqu'à 3 km, on les met en forêt, loin des cultures, pour avoir l'assurance de ne pas être contaminé, quoi. Un apiculteur du sud de la France a fait une expérience avec ses ruches et il s'est retrouvé avec 39% de pollen transgénique dans ses trappes à pollen, alors que les abeilles étaient à 1 km de 100 de la parcelle transgénique. Eh bien, ça fait que du coup, en tant qu'apiculteur, je deviens complice de la dissémination des OGM, involontairement. Et ben ça, j'accepte pas, quoi. J'accepte pas ça. Donc j'ai fait ce premier fauchage. Donc je me suis exposé à une garde à vue en gendarmerie. Moi, mon droit de produire du miel et du pollen sans OGM, c'est aussi une entrave à produire comme je le veux, quoi. Et moi, ce que je dis aussi face à ça, c'est que ma première propriété privée, eh bien, c'est mon corps, quoi. Et eh bien, mon corps, je n'accepte pas qu'on lui donne à manger n'importe quoi, surtout sans le savoir, quoi.
Oui, c'est inimaginable. Enfin, imaginez que des gens veuillent faire de telles fortunes en utilisant l'alimentation. En fait, ce qu'ils veulent, c'est le monopole de l'alimentation pour pouvoir continuer de gagner toujours plus d'argent dont on se demande ce qu'ils vont faire.
Ouais, moi je crois que je vais prendre une petite laine de plus. Hein. Alors
C'est Saïd, c'est mercredi soir. Je viens juste d'entendre des nouvelles qu'il y a un accord qui a été signé avec l'Europe du Canada pour que le maïs de feuilles transgéniques de l'Ouest puisse être exporté. Je ne sais pas si tu avais entendu aujourd'hui. C'est tellement triste. Mais autrement, je t'adore, puis bonne journée demain.
C'est pas à propos de ton gros derrière. C'est à propos des oignons et des patates. C'est de vague. Son derrière est aussi beau. C'est comme un accouchement. Comment ça? Ben, c'est parce qu'il faut que je mette mes mains comme il faut dans la terre. Puis là, je cherche jusqu'à temps que je trouve la forme ronde. Puis là, il faut que je la dégage puis que je la tire.
My mom's garden was not only the place where I developed my love of food, it was also where I learned how to use my first video camera. Filming was an excuse to hang out with her in her garden, and amidst a lot of joking and shaky footage, I listened to her stories about the seeds and plants that she grew and the recipes she made with them. After I came back from France, I became more obsessed than ever with cooking, and I started a food blog where I made cooking videos of some of my favorite garden-to-table recipes. But my time in Europe had also left me with a nagging question that wouldn't go away. If GMOs were labeled in 64 countries around the world, why were they not labeled in Canada and the United States?
Second reading of Bill C-517, an act to amend the Food and Drugs Act mandatory labeling for genetically modified foods.
Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to inform consumers, to let them know what they're eating, what they're consuming, and to give consumers the choice.
But if we were to put a label on of genetic modified foods on every product in Canada, we would be misleading the consumer. And we'd be saying to the consumer that we're a little concerned about genetic modified foods, or we wouldn't put it on a label.
This bill, Mr. Speaker, other than to say it is a genetically modified food, which, to be honest, happens in both natural breeding and scientific means, I think we ought to be blunt about it. It does actually cater to emotion and cater to some of the fear to people's fears that are out there about the unknown.
It's patently false to try to compare these two systems and assume that they are one. For on the one hand, we're choosing the cow from the herd that might produce more milk. But in this case, the genetic modification of food is when a scientist comes along and pulls genes from an organism at the molecular level and replaces them oftentimes with genes from an entirely different organism. And scientists working at Health Canada who have brought forward concerns about genetically modified products have had a number of things happen to them. And promotion wasn't one of them. They've been terminated, they've been threatened, they've been muzzled.
Bonjour, Monsieur Perron. Ça va bien?
C'est Aube, Aube. Bonjour. Ah, c'est un bisou que ça me prend.
Moi, là, je suis pas ici là, pour virer le monde à l'envers. Je suis ici pour poser des questions, avoir des réponses et ayant comme but, c'est ce que tu manges, c'est bon pour ta santé. Puis tu as le choix de dire j'en veux ou j'en veux pas. Mon compétiteur, c'est pas monsieur, madame, tout le monde, c'est pas... Il n'y a rien de là-dedans. Mon compétiteur sur le projet de loi, c'est la Sainte Pièce, qui est un gros compétiteur. Puis l'argent, c'est un des pouvoirs les plus puissants, hein, bien des fois beaucoup plus puissants que les politiciens, là.
The House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion at second reading stage of Bill C-517. Those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Monsieur Perron.
Monsieur Perron.
Mr. Dewar.
Mr. Dewar.
Mr. Marston.
Mr. Marston.
Ms. Nash.
Ms. Nash.
Mr. Adamanenko.
Mr. Adamanenko.
Mr. Stauffer.
Mr. Stauffer.
Mr. Watson.
Mr. Watson.
Ms. Pretty.
Ms. Pretty.
Mrs. Matheson.
Ms. Matheson.
Madame Savoie.
Madame Savoie.
Ms. Bell, Vancouver Island North. Mr. Bevington. Ms. Chow.
All those on my left opposed to the motion will please rise.
Mr. Galipo.
Mr. Galipo.
Mr. Scheer. Mr. Legge.
Bonjour, Aube, ici ton grand-papa Gilbert, donc comment vas-tu? Écoute, je t'appelais, le vote sur le 517 a eu lieu hier soir. Malheureusement, ça fut une défaite, donc honnêtement, sérieusement, ce matin, là, mon cœur et mon âme saignent. Ça fait que si tu veux me rappeler à Ottawa, OK, bye-bye, Aube.
We feel the opportunities of this technology far outweigh any perceived or actual risk.
Any politician who tells you these products are safe and that is known through scientific testing is either very, very stupid or they're lying.
Genetically modified plants, a blessing or a curse?
Why not label it? You're so proud of it. Why not label it? If you're so proud of it, why not label it?
In 2010, I was 11 years old, and I started an organization called Kids Right to Know. And our goal is to achieve mandatory GMO labeling on all our food products. Our government, first of all, says it's a democracy, so we all have the freedom of speech and freedom of what we eat, freedom of everything, right? But we don't really have the freedom because they're not telling us what we're eating. We don't really have the choice.
GMOs have got to go, hey, hey.
From the time they were introduced in the late 90s to now, people in Canada want GMOs labeled. Our government isn't doing what we are demanding. And to me, that's not much of a democracy at all. This is simply our right to know. And why is that being hidden from us?
Governments are not representing the people. Governments are completely in the hands, in the grip of the big corporations. It's all about money. I became interested in GMOs from the moment I first heard about them. You know, the idea of messing about with the genetics of plants and never really being able to predict exactly what the consequences will be. It's a complete lie that there's a consensus of scientific opinion that GMOs are safe. There is no such consensus. And we're making decisions not based on how will this decision affect our people generations ahead, like the indigenous people, but rather how will this benefit me now, the next shareholders meeting, my next political campaign. And it seems to me, here we are, the most intellectual creature that's ever walked the planet, and yet we're destroying our only home. So there's clearly a disconnect between the clever brain and the human heart.
Our expert panel said that to assure that these new products are environmentally safe and safe to human health, you need to monitor these products in the marketplace. If you have new allergic responses emerging, is it the GMO variety or the non-GMO variety? You can't even know that if you aren't labeling. There are other reasons for labeling as well. For example, if you are a member of the Jewish faith and you do not want to be eating any pork products, would you eat a tomato that had a gene taken from a pig?
There's a lot of questions about the impacts of genetically modified crops and foods, and yet 20 years of genetically modified foods, we have no labeling, despite consistent polling that over 80% of Canadians want it. So what's going on here? The industry has a lot of economic and political power, and that's why we don't have labeling.
Hello, you've reached Media Relations at Health Canada. Please leave your name and number.
I'm just calling to see where things are at with my interview request with Health Canada. I put in a request several months ago, and I've been transferred back and forth, between CFIA and Health Canada. I'm really hoping to get an update on where we're at.
C'est ta maman. Je vais dire que je viens de faire une lasagne extraordinaire. J'ai utilisé des zucchinis du jardin au lieu des pâtes de lasagne. C'est tellement bon. Je vais t'envoyer la recette. Je sais que tu te prépares pour ton entrevue. Pas besoin de me rappeler tout de suite. On va se parler quand tu reviendras des États-Unis. OK? Je t'adore. Bon voyage.
When we sued the FDA for not labeling genetically engineered foods in the late 90s, we got 60,000 pages of discovery. Those are the documents you get when you sue. It's called discovery. And in those pages, when we looked through them, we were shocked. What we found was FDA scientist after FDA scientist was saying, these foods are completely new. And what we're seeing is they can make a non-toxic food and make it toxic. We're seeing how these new genetic material can create proteins that could be allergenic, could cause allergies. We're seeing how the process in food is lowering nutrition. This is the scientists at the FDA. What happened in 1992 was that they put Monsanto people in at the top of the agency. They ignored the scientists, completely ignored the scientists, and then brought in their no mandatory testing, no mandatory labeling position, which remains in place today. So what we've seen is a revolving door. We've had a number of people from Monsanto, many from DuPont, who have actually been in top positions at the USDA and the FDA over the last 20 years, making darn sure that when those agencies did come out with any kind of pseudo-regulation, that it was what the industry wanted. The industry will often say these are the most regulated crops in history. Well, maybe somewhere else. I'm not an expert on the law in many other countries, but I am an expert in laws in the United States, and I can tell you, not only are they not the most, they are virtually unregulated.
That one looks good, eh?
After I got my PhD and completed a 2-year postdoc, I took a job at a company called CalGene Incorporated that was right here in Davis. And they were already on their way to bringing the first genetically engineered food to market. Because we were going to be first, they wanted to be completely transparent. So the first product out in 1994 was labeled. I actually have a sticker here from the tomatoes. If you look down underneath here, it says grown from genetically modified seeds right there on the label. And after that, when the other developers of these products decided they weren't going to label, I think that only contributes to the public's wariness about the technology. You know, it's the scientist's job to explain the science underlying the technology, warts and all, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly. And for anyone to say that all products of this technology are safe, to me that's a ridiculous statement because it's a technology. There can be errors, human error associated with it. We don't completely understand everything about the genomes, the organisms we're inserting genes into. And the FDA at this point, if you add water to a food product, you must put water on the food label. But if you add insecticide to your product through genetic engineering, you need not label your product. And I think it needs to change.
All of these products that come onto the market in Canada have gone through our regulatory system. And that's the standard by which we as Canadians define by law food safety, okay? Now, if you choose to say, I don't trust that, fine. You have an option. In organic, you can claim, or if you're even in traditional, you can say, we don't. But to put it on everything and significantly raise the overall food price, because you got to keep track of all the various types and all that kind of stuff, would add to our overall cost, create, in my opinion, misleading labels, is wrong. Now, a question I ask you, if you say, this contains genetically engineered product, how does the public interpret that? Fear. That is misleading, because there is no danger, as determined by government, to that.
I just wonder, like, if it was labeled, then at least...
So are we going to put a label on, this may kill you?
Well, that's not what a GMO label is.
Using your logic, I think you would.
But I keep coming back to Europe because they do it in
You
Europe.
want my honest opinion about Europe?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it comes down to how society looks at food. In Europe, food is looked at as part of a tradition and a right. The farmers of Europe farm the government more than they farm the marketplace. In other words, they're paid by government to have small little farms and, you know, that picturesque scenery, all that kind of stuff.
Dr. Surgener did not seem to share my enthusiasm for small, diversified farms or for European food culture. Maybe he wasn't aware that 80% of the world is actually fed by small-scale farmers, and that the subsidies he was referring to actually benefit large industrial monocultures, not small sustainable farms. But his attitude was very much in line with the get big or get out policies that have shaped North American agriculture for the past 40 years. These policies have meant that large industrial farms are encouraged to get bigger and bigger, while millions of small family farmers have been forced to abandon their livelihoods. Now I just might adjust your microphone a little bit.
I've grown non-GMO corn the whole 40 years I've farmed.
I was skeptical of the big companies, what they were saying about these new products. It was genetically modified seed that brought in the idea that farmers couldn't save their seed because they were patented. And you had to sign a technology agreement saying you were not going to save them. But for a long, long time, farmers saved their soybean seed. I think these big companies realized that there was a lot more money in patented seed, and they wanted to get farmers forced into raising that patented seed year after year. When they brought out Roundup Ready crops, the companies that I normally depended on for seed took their non-GMO seed right off the market, so there really wasn't a choice. Initially they said, oh, you'll be using less chemicals. And it turns out that because bugs became resistant to the Bt traits, you have to use chemicals now. And for weeds became resistant to Roundup. So you now have to either use more Roundup or put other chemicals in the tank to kill the weeds. I think it's important to realize that the Iowa State University Weed Guide said that history has shown that any weed program that's dependent on chemicals is bound to fail. So what does that say about our agricultural system? Well, it's bound to fail. So what we've had is farmers thinking that, well, the only way I'm going to survive is by producing as much as I possibly can. But it has meant that our rural communities have collapsed. There's so few farmers left. And when you're out here in Iowa and you look all around for miles and miles, it's all corn and soybeans now. And the countryside is devoid of the biodiversity that we used to enjoy. And so they tell everybody that, oh, we're doing all this so we can feed the world. The whole idea of feeding the world ignores whether what we're eating is nutritious or not. And corn and soybeans aren't used to create nutritious food.
When I hear farmers from the Corn Belt saying that we have to have GMOs and we have to have all these pesticides and chemicals because we need to feed the world, I always want to ask them, have you ever eaten anything that grows on your farm? Because the vast majority of the corn grown in the United States goes into feeding livestock or ethanol production. I grew up on a family dairy farm. My parents had this common sense approach of putting poisons in things can't be good. And I went to college and learned modern conventional agriculture, and I came home and we started farming the way I was taught. But all the while we were farming conventionally, there were these uncomfortable, nagging observations being made that the system really wasn't working the way we were told it was going to work. And it constantly needed newer and generally more toxic inputs in order to keep it going. But one day I went to fold up the sprayer in one of our conventional fields and my right arm wouldn't move. And I spent the summer with my right arm paralyzed so that it couldn't do anything.
About 5 years later, I was rereading Silent Spring, and there Rachel Carson described the symptoms of 2,4-D poisoning, and they were exactly what Klaus had experienced, and he was spraying 2,4-D.
At the time when we started using chemicals, 2,4-D was the first widespread herbicide. It was used on huge numbers of acres. And later, genetic engineering, Roundup Ready crops came along, and we were told that in order to get rid of these hard, dangerous chemistries, that we needed to use genetically engineered glyphosate-tolerant crops. Now, the glyphosate no longer works, the Roundup Ready crops are not effective, and we're told we have to go back to these hard chemistries, and we have to have crops that are engineered to take even larger doses of these old, dangerous chemicals that we were at one time told genetic engineering was going to eliminate.
80% of all genetically engineered crops are designed to withstand herbicides. Very good for Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Bayer and Dow, the major companies. They're selling more of their chemicals because they are chemical companies. That's what they do. And so 150 million more pounds of herbicide each year in the United States are sprayed because of GMOs.
We're here at the EPA on World Food Day because the EPA is not protecting us. We had 10,000 women call the EPA in 3 days last May, and they eventually did agree to test for glyphosate in breast milk. And we need to remind the EPA to do their job.
Roundup is the most widely used herbicide in the world, and glyphosate is the declared active ingredient in Roundup.
80% of GMOs are engineered to withstand glyphosate. The problem with that is that glyphosate does not dry off, it doesn't wash off, and it doesn't cook off. So we are then ingesting glyphosate and Roundup, and we're not genetically engineered to withstand it. When moms across America found out about the dangers of glyphosate, we decided to find out if it was in our children, in our bodies, and in our water. So we got the first testing in America for glyphosate in water, urine, and for the first time in the world, in breast milk. We found levels of glyphosate in our breast milk over 3,000 times higher, which has been shown to cause harm. So we are, of course, extremely concerned about the levels of glyphosate in our children's bodies and in our breast milk.
What we've seen now is predictable. With 150 million more pounds of Roundup being poured on our crops every year, weeds are becoming resistant to Roundup. Just like antibiotics. You give the population too many antibiotics, you get bacteria and disease agents that are resistant to it. So Dow Chemical is coming up with 2,4-D resistant corn. 2,4-D is a very powerful herbicide that was an element of Agent Orange that we used in Vietnam. They're going up, that's a higher level, more pathogenic, more dangerous, more toxic herbicide. Well, they need it now because the weeds aren't being killed with Roundup. So what's going to happen 5 years from now? You're going to have super weeds, and you won't be able to kill the weeds with anything. And meanwhile, the companies will have made billions of dollars in selling more and more of these chemicals, but to hide the fact that this is just brutal, naked, corporate chemical self-interest, they have to get very emotional about saving the world and progress and feeding people.
All around the world, farmers like you want to grow healthy crops to feed our growing planet. By the year 2050, there will be 9 billion mouths to feed. We're here to help you maximize yields. With our advanced scientific innovations and cutting-edge genetically enhanced seed technology, we can help you achieve higher yields and grow more food to improve the lives of people around the planet. We're making a better world, 1 acre at a time.
With organic-based agriculture, we don't have the amount of soil loss. We don't have the amount of water quality issues. We can improve the ecology while taking care of producing yield. We don't need Roundup. We don't need BT corn. We have healthy plants. We have weed control. My background is in plant breeding and genetics. One of the things I did as a plant breeder at Cornell was I worked in genetic engineering in the early years. My disappointment with biotech crops is that they have failed to deliver on the promises that they made.
This will be the hybrid seed that's planted next year.
One of the things that we've tried to do here in New York is take the science at Cornell and make it work for organic farmers. And part of that is producing hybrids of corn that don't need the high fertilizers or the insecticides and have them be just as productive.
And this shows how bad the drought is. This corn would normally be 12 feet tall.
Yeah, and showing us walking through a field of corn this height is not great. Just make sure you're saying it's for seed production.
We farm 1,600 acres. It's all certified organic. Our yields are actually higher than most of our conventional neighbors. We had a really interesting day. This was quite a few years ago in a drought, and they were demonstrating a new combine that had a yield monitor in it, and it was reading what people's yields were. And everybody's yields were poor, and they were saying, well, how's that organic corn yielding? Ha, ha, ha. And one of our neighbors rode in the combine, and when he got out, he was literally talking to himself because he'd seen the yield monitor hit 260 when his had done 60. GMOs have never raised yields. In fact, this was told to me by the inventor of the gene gun. John Sanford was a friend of Mary Hall and mine. And at a picnic one time, he pointedly told me that genetic engineering will not raise yields. 80% of the world is being fed by small-scale farmers with far less technology, far less inputs, and a lot poorer land.
It's one of the things that a lot of times they in the conventional world say, we can't feed the world because we're unproductive, we can't control weeds. It's just not true. We have 1,600 acres, but we're not the biggest organic grain farm, even in New York. It can be done on a large scale with modern equipment. This is a cultivator that our son brought back from Germany that is GPS guided and very precise. And this is the way we're going to be able to control weeds. This is cutting edge. This is cutting edge science, it's cutting edge agriculture. It's modern technology, but it's not using the tools of pesticides and GMO agriculture.
Allô, ma belle maman, tu vas être dans le jardin. Je vais te rappeler ce soir, mais je voulais juste savoir comment tu étais allée à l'hôpital, puis si tu as les résultats des examens encore. Ça fait, en tout cas, si tu as la chance, rappelle-moi, sinon je vais te rappeler ce soir. Ok, je t'aime. Mouah.
C'est parce que, à cause que les fraises ils poussent, on va laisser les fraises embarquer là pour l'année prochaine. C'est pour les tirer. Ça fait que c'est mieux qu'on mette des plants de tomates, mais on prenait quelque chose, soit du basilic, ou j'ai vu qu'il y a du dill. Umberto, une. Puis si tu prenais les sapotettes, puis une à ton choix dans la. Fait qu'on a toutes les tomates aussi.
Right before her 56th birthday, my mom began to lose mobility in one of her legs. A few months later, an MRI detected a tumor in her brain. It was springtime, and as usual, she had planted way too many seedlings. She wasn't well enough to put them in the ground, so she told us where to put everything.
Oh, il faudrait semer les pimentons à fleurs. Les Guatamotes zapotèques. Ça, c'est une rare espèce de tomate qui fait un buisson, puis avec plein de petites tomates cerises comme des grappes de raisin, là, qui est vraiment bonne.
Tu les as-tu plantées avant?
Ah oui, mais c'est vraiment une belle plante. Toutes les pois sèches comme pour faire de la soupe, que j'adore mettre à chaque année. Je les ai pas mis cette année. Je me suis dit, on peut réserver ça pour l'année prochaine. J'aime toujours avoir au moins quelques grandes soupes durant l'hiver, que ça vient tout de notre jardin, de la soupe aux pois. Puis comme je suis québécoise, puis la soupe aux pois, c'est très traditionnel. C'est difficile de moi pas faire des choses, mais c'est intéressant de voir qu'est-ce que les autres font, puis comment ça donne des beaux résultats. Puis on attend une patch de fraises incroyable avec le travail que Aube a fait.
Tu peux me parler comme si c'est moi.
Que t'as fait? C'est elle, là, qui tient la caméra.
Ah oui!
Qui aime jardiner.
Gary, do you know if I'm doing this right? Planting onions, like just...
I've never done it before.
Okay.
I wouldn't know how far apart to put them.
Faire un jardin, c'est comme quand tu suis un peu, puis tu es penché sur ton outil de travail pour te soutenir, pour prendre un petit repos, puis essuyer la sueur sur ton front. Là, tu entends les oiseaux chanter, tu vois les papillons voler autour des fleurs. Puis c'est faire un jardin où tu mélanges un peu de fleurs, un peu de légumes, un peu de toutes sortes de choses. Puis c'est juste magique. Puis après ça, c'est la fête, parce qu'on mange les bonnes choses.
Bonjour, Aube. I heard from the program now that apparently the spokes called you. His name is Neil. Apparently he left you a message. Not sure I was not there, but he would be the man.
Hi, Aube. This is Neil calling from Health Canada. Unfortunately, I'm not available to participate in the filmed interview that you've requested. Okay, thanks. Bye.
I'll try and figure it out and see what's happening and if there's anything we can do for you.
Well, I guess I find it extremely concerning and puzzling that Health Canada is not willing to speak with me. I mean, I'm not surprised when a company like Monsanto refuses to be interviewed, but you guys are our public, taxpayer-funded agency in this country that regulates GMOs, and so you're accountable to Canadians, and you have a responsibility to answer questions. So I've been trying for months now to line up this interview. I've been transferred from person to person and department to department. The whole process has been quite bizarre, actually. So I guess what I'm wondering at this point is there anyone at Health Canada who is willing to speak with me? Is there anyone at all there who can answer my questions?
Hi, Aube. It's Suzanne from Health Canada. I looked into everything, and there's absolutely nothing more we can do for you, unfortunately. We put you through to the only contact that would be able to speak with you, and if they're unwilling to go on camera, then there's nothing further we can help you with. Sorry, I'm sure it's disappointing, but media relations will not be able to assist you further. Bye-bye.
In their official written response to my interview requests, Health Canada emphasized their commitment to openness and transparency, while at the same time declining to give a reason for their refusal to be interviewed. After she had read the Royal Society's report on GMOs, my mom had tried to find out how many of its 53 recommendations had been implemented. She never got an answer, and when I made the same inquiry, Health Canada sent me a long-winded reply that, again, completely avoided answering our question.
Well, it's very clear that the government did not implement the recommendations of the Royal Society. It's very clear in government literature right now that 53 recommendations and essentially 2 recommendations were fully implemented.
J'appelle seulement pour te dire, essaye pas de me rejoindre ce matin. Le docteur McNally, le docteur de soins palliatifs, avait annoncé une visite à 10h30. Puis Gary va revenir de ramasser des framboises, puis on va prendre la visite ensemble. Puis après, je vais t'appeler. OK, ça fait que je te parle un petit peu plus tard aujourd'hui, puis j'aurai plus de choses à dire à ce moment-là. Bye.
On va faire comme une, juste pas deux.
Puis là, en même temps que tu cuisines, je pensais que tu me racontes la première fois que
Oh.
tu fais cette recette-là.
Non.
Pourquoi?
Parce que je les mets pour le avec les bleuets.
Tu fais quoi? Réal?
Oh! Non. Ça, c'est une recette que j'ai faite quand j'étais à la campagne dans une abondance de bleuets. C'est fantastique avec des frais de saison. Comme c'est la saison des framboises, que c'est la fête de Gary, c'était très approprié. Pour 45 minutes, c'est ça?
Ça n'en a pas fait beaucoup, hein?
Non, c'est une torte.
Ah,
Ok, j'ai de la misère à marcher, ça fait que là, fais attention. Puis, que je te loue? Oui, je pense que je vais être capable. 6h27, ça fait 45, ça va nous amener à peu près 7h10.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Whoa, guys, come on. I'm not gonna carry this song.
Happy birthday to you.
Ok, ça commence à être très agaçant d'avoir un si beau gâteau ensemble. Oui. C'est la oui. Merci. Maintenant, everybody can do that, like that.
Jason, are you ready for?
Ça fait drôle de me voir avec des cheveux sur la photo.
Alors, un, puis encore.
Bonne fête, Jalie. Bonne fête, Jalie.
C'est quoi qui se passe donc? J'ai plus des chandelles.
Avec on sait pas où ils sont.
Dans le tiroir, là.
Bonne fête.
Gary, est-ce que tu veux un morceau de gâteau?
Il est un petit peu massif, mais...
Juste 1 kilo.
Hey, c'est un gâteau spécial, ça s'appelle un chocolat épais, c'est...
T'as pas oublié son nom.
Gâteau spécial, il est supposé d'être comme ça c'est une sorte de poche.
Ceux qui regardent la vidéo, là, puis qui se joignent à nous pour ma fête, est-ce que vous voulez
Je te laisserai des mots en dessous de ta porte, en dessous de la mur qui chante, tout près de la place où tes pieds passent, cachés dans les trous dans ton divan. Et quand tu es seul pendant un instant, ramasse-moi quand tu voudras, ramasse-moi quand tu voudras, ramasse-moi quand tu
I'll never know if my mom's cancer was connected to the heavy pesticide use in the agricultural valley where she lived. But it's a question that haunts me each time I hear of a new study that exposes the link between pesticides and cancer. In the years after she died, I gave up on finishing this film. I had always felt that she and I were working on it together, that it was somehow our film, and I didn't want to finish it alone. I just wanted to get away from the whole thorny topic of GMOs, and I became more and more interested in organic farming. I figured that if I just learned how to grow my own food, I wouldn't have to think about GMOs anymore. But then, one day, I found out how many miles corn pollen can travel and how easy it is to have your crop contaminated by neighboring GMOs. It's the nature of living organisms to reproduce and spread, and once they're released into the environment, GMOs are impossible to control. You can't call them back into the lab. I realized that this wasn't a subject I could just walk away from. GMOs were forcing me to finish this film, and I could feel my mom nudging me forward as well. She believed that with every bite of food we eat, we're making a choice about the kind of world we want to live in and the kind of agriculture we want to support. She would always remind us that democracy is about more than just voting once every few years. It's about being active in the world and holding our governments accountable to the people they represent. A few years after my mom died, the GMO labeling movement began to gain momentum, and individual states tried to pass GMO labeling laws. By 2012, California was poised to become the first state to label GMOs. I knew my mom would have wanted to be there, and for the first time since she died, I picked up my camera again and bought a ticket to San Francisco.
As I could see that no government agency or legislative body would ever give us what we the people wanted, I decided that it was time to invoke the right of the people of California to stand up and demand we want genetically engineered foods labeled.
A month ago, we were winning this proposition 2-1. In the last month, the victory margin has slimmed to 0. We are in a dead heat because $45 million, unfortunately, can buy elections.
It's right here. You guys are the easiest ones.
My name is Monica Lopez. I've been living in Europe for the last 11 years. Very surprised to come back 2 years ago and find the quality of food that our children are eating. For me, it was just a fundamental calling to get involved with the thing that we all have a right to. So it's 3 days before the election. A giant group of us met at Dolores Park this morning to talk to shop owners, to talk to people at the bus stops and sidewalks, and make sure that people realize what this is about, and it's completely in our hands to turn it around.
You know, a couple months ago, the polls had 65% of the people would vote yes on this. They wanted to know what was in their food. And in the last, I don't know how many weeks it's been, the opposition have been spending $1 million a day and putting out ads that the newspapers have done some fact checking on, and misleading, I have to say, they're misleading. And so money, you follow the money.
The last thing small business owners like this grocer need is more bureaucracy and government interference. Prop 37 is a confusing labeling scheme that would tie him up with red tape and cost him and his customers thousands of dollars a year.
Most of their advertising and their talking points were full of lies. The California Legislative Analyst's Office said that passing Prop 37 would only cost California voters 1 to 3 cents per year. The No side fundamentally knows that there will be no food cost increase because they already label their food products in 61 other countries around the world.
I think that no matter which way the vote goes, honestly, we've won. We have created a nationwide discussion of genetically engineered foods. There's over 20 additional states who are looking at creating their own state propositions for labeling. So this is just the beginning.
That's what $50 million will buy you, a 9-point percentage spread. We fought the largest companies on the planet. I mean, giant chemical and pesticide companies. Only reason the other side is ahead, so they spent $50 million, and they're willing to tell any lie they could.
When I started this project, it was meant to be a film about food. But more and more, it was becoming a film about democracy and about who gets to make our food policies. Is it the people we elect to represent us, or is it corporations and their heavily financed lobbyists? After California's narrow loss, other states also tried to pass GMO labeling laws. But again, industry spent millions of dollars on ads and government lobbying to defeat them.
One of my reasons for hope is what I call the indomitable human spirit. And these are people who tackle the seemingly impossible and won't give up. And I think of people like Rachel Carson, who even continued fighting against the use of DDT when she was dying of cancer. And so I think that when people feel like giving up because everything seems so impossible, the encouraging thing is that there are more and more and more people wanting to know what's in their food. And if there's a huge percentage of people who want labeling, then there must be a way to use this force of numbers against the corporations.
We're fighting major corporations and even our own government. We're not asking for much. I'm simply asking for labeling.
Honesty.
Honesty, exactly. Honesty. We're fighting for honesty and transparency. Please get involved.
Yes.
Write letters. Please do something about it, because us, the youth, are the ones that are going to have to live with this issue. We have to make our voices heard and inspire a movement of not just words, but of action.
Hell no, GMO! We say no to Monsanto! We say no to Monsanto! Hell no, GMO! Hell no, GMO! We say no to Monsanto! We say no to
It was just over 2 years ago that many of us gathered on these very same steps to join Governor Shumlin as he signed the nation's first GMO labeling bill into law. And we return today to celebrate the fact that that law goes into effect today. And the fact that if you go down the aisle of any grocery store in Vermont, you can find labeled products. And if you don't believe me, you can check out this can of Campbell's soup I picked up just yesterday.
Very simple, produced with genetic engineering. The sky did not fall.
Some of the biggest food companies in the world are labeling their products nationwide right now in order to comply with Vermont's law. They've just decided, instead of just having a special label for Vermont, we're going to label all of our products. But there are efforts afoot in Congress right now to preempt not only Vermont's law, but any state that would want to pass a similar GMO labeling law.
We have a somewhat surprised guest, the great state of Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's been a champion of our right to know.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. All right, let me begin by thanking all of you for doing what citizens should be doing in a democracy. You organized, you knocked on doors, you went to the legislature. That is what democracy is supposed to be about. And as a Vermonter, I am very proud that our state became the first state to mandate labeling for food that contains GMO products. Unfortunately, the major agribusiness and biotech corporations disagree. They do not believe that people should have a right to know what's in the food that they eat. And that is why they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to overturn the GMO right to know legislation that Vermont and other states have passed. And then we wonder why so many people give up on the political process and why they don't come out to vote. When the people go forward and pass good legislation, we're not going to allow multi-billion-dollar corporations to rescind that legislation.
Agriculture biotechnology has become an invaluable tool in ensuring the success of the American farmer in meeting the challenge of increasing yield in a more efficient, safe, and responsible manner. If we don't act today, what we face is a handful of states that have chosen to enact labeling requirements on information that has nothing to do with health, with safety, or nutrition. Those decisions impact the farmers in fields who would be pressured to grow less efficient crops so manufacturers could avoid these demonizing labels. This will result in less food available to the many mouths in our troubled and hungry world.
The question now occurs on the motion to concur in the House amendment to S 764 with amendment number 4935.
Just 1 week after Vermont's labeling law went into effect, Senator Roberts' bill, known as the Dark Act, passed in the Senate, overturning Vermont's short-lived law and banning any state from having a GMO labeling law. This new federal legislation claimed that it would label GMOs at the national level, but it was so full of loopholes that even the Food and Drug Administration admitted that few, if any, GMOs would actually be labeled as a result. The agribusiness industry got exactly what it had lobbied for, a pretend GMO labeling law that in reality gave it a free pass to avoid clear on-package labeling.
The motion to concur is agreed to.
I think the best way to feed a hungry planet is through traditional methods. We have to leave behind this absurdity of poisoning the land and spraying poisonous chemicals on our food, because this is not helping to feed the world. And I think the new ways of thinking about growing food is really exciting, bringing back fertility to overused poisoned soil and making use of nature to grow the food in the right way and to get back to the small farmers, the people who care about the land.
You know, when you look at the whole food thing, you realize that, and my grandmother believed this, being a woman who was religious, that to live we have to, kill and then use nature. We have to break the body and blood, if you will, of the natural world for us to survive. But if you did it reverently, and if you did it lovingly, that it was sort of a sacrament for her. And I think it's really important for America, which has gotten so addicted to fast food and this sort of one-night stand. You're eating your burger, you don't care where it came from, you don't care where it's going. For us to re-understand the mystery and the skill that's involved in food, I think it would restore a lot of humanity to our culture. And I learned that from my grandmother.
Now I've decided to transition some ground to organic. And I've noticed the number of beneficial insects like monarch butterflies have increased. So life has become way more beautiful on my farm. I think eating good food is becoming more and more popular. And I think the knowledge that genetically modified crops aren't necessary to produce good food. In fact, they're maybe detrimental. So I think as the public gets more and more informed about that, the more they're going to demand that food be labeled. And if it isn't, then they know there's something wrong with the system. There's something wrong with our democracy.
My mom always used to say that a great recipe doesn't start in the kitchen. It starts outside with the seed in the ground. Each year, she would grow a special yellow pea to make her traditional Quebec pea soup. She would always put aside some of the best peas for replanting the next spring, and each year the cycle would start over again. Last spring, I planted some of the pea seeds that she passed on to me. I watched them grow all summer long and harvested them in the fall to make her pea soup, making sure to put aside a jar of peas for replanting. I see those seeds now as a living bridge that connects my mom's life to my own, reminding me of my roots and where I come from. I never could have imagined that it would take me 10 years to finish this film, and that by the time it was done, the one person I most wanted to share it with would not be here to see it. But I've felt her presence with me at every step of the way. My mom passed on to me her conviction that we all have a right to know what's in our food. Throughout her life, she taught me to celebrate the stories behind the foods that nourish us, and to fight for a world where we can reclaim our seeds, our food policies, and the meals that we share with our loved ones. She believed that with every meal we eat, we're making a choice about the kind of world we want to live in. It's up to each and every one of us to make it a good one.
From under, and we can remember the reasons. Well, I'm staying right here. Well, I'm staying right here. once you get it.